I am calling
I'm
the,
learning how to choose the right audio apps for you. Which one do you want to use?
Well,
What are the options?
sometimes my watch just talks to me and I'm not sure why. I'm calling the meeting, the planning commission meeting of October 17th, 2022 to order. And we'll begin with a roll call. Why don't we begin with Bree?
Bree Rivera. Tamara Stoner.
George Velasquez.
Gail Sites?
Kristen Zumar. Cynthia Batty.
And we also have Chris Rogers, our city planner, here tonight. And Sean Tucker is representing the Lincoln Strive project, as well as many other members of the development team here tonight. And we also have some members of the public. So welcome everyone and thank you for coming. This is a comprehensive plan amendment workshop associated with the Flats at River Edge rezoning application. Chris Rogers, city planner, will be making a presentation on Delaware comprehensive plans and on those issues in Newcastle's 2020 comprehensive plan related to the subject parcels. And the River Edge development team will also be presenting. They have been asked to keep their presentation to comprehensive plan issues related to their proposed development in River Edge. We are encouraging members of the Planning Commission to ask questions and get needed clarification as information is presented. After both presentations, there is time for additional Planning Commission discussion, and we will accept comments from the public after the presentations. The workshop's meant to give information to the Planning Commission and to the public, and to allow for discussion and questions. We will not be making a recommendation at the workshop. As will be discussed at the workshop, we still need to hold a formal public hearing on the rezoning application as required in the city code. So with that, I'm going to turn the meeting over to Chris Rogers, Newcastle City Planner.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Standing over here, it's a little awkward, but everybody feel free to turn their chairs. My name is Chris Rogers with AECom. I'm the city planner for the city of Newcastle. I'm going to be making a presentation tonight. The purpose of the presentation is to provide some background as to why we're here. What is the Planning Commission's role in this rezoning application? What is your statutory role in the city code? What's your role per the Delaware Code? We're going to get into some issues regarding the city's comprehensive plan in general, and then we're going to talk about some issues in the comprehensive plan that are specific to this site. So hopefully this will provide some clarification as to what your role should be moving forward in this, what was initially a rezoning application. So tonight we're going to talk about why we're here. We're going to talk about comprehensive plans in general per the state code. Again, we're going to talk about specifics of the county of the city's 2020 comprehensive plan. There were some questions in the past about were there previous comprehensive plan amendment and what were those examples and can we learn from those? We're going to talk about the city and county zoning regulations, because those are pertinent relative to the existing land use surrounding the subject property. Boiling or Drilling down a little bit closer regarding the site, we're going to talk about the project access. We're going to talk about the history of the industrial park and its annexation. There's been a lot of questions regarding sea level rise. We're going to get into a little bit of that, talk about next steps, and open it up for discussions and questions. My presentation doesn't really make any conclusions. This presentation is the facts. I cite state code, I cite city code, I cite sections of the comprehensive plan that I felt that were relevant. It's a little heavy with the words, I understand that, but I didn't want to characterize or not quote exactly from the source. So this presentation is not meant to make any conclusions regarding the nature of the plan or the application. It's just to present information for all of us and specifically for the planning commission so you can make an informed decision moving forward. All right. So why are we here? In April 2022, the applicant requested a rezoning for a few parcels of that acreage from industrial office park IOP to residential R3 and general commercial district to develop a mixed use project consisting of 272 apartments, and you can see the other units. I'm not going to quote, there's a lot of words on these slides, and I'm not going to quote every word on each slide. Associated with the rezoning application was a specific plan. So there was a plan associated with the rezoning application. Why are we here continued? That section of the city code states that the city council may from time to time modify or repeal the zoning regulations, restrictions, and boundaries. So that's what we're talking about. This is the initial request was for a rezoning. So that is I can't point because pointers don't work on the screen, but that is a boundary. They're requesting a change to the zoning map. So that is a change to a zoning boundary. Another section in 23061 states that any proposals for amending the regulations or the boundaries before they're acted upon by the council, they shall be referred to the planning commission for consideration and recommendation. So that's your primary role, is when the city council gets a rezoning application, they refer it to the planning commission for your recommendation. City council has the ultimate say in that application, but they look to you as the primary recommending body regarding this application. 61A states any amendment shall be in accordance with the comprehensive plan. There's a lot of sections in the comp plan that say that, and we're going to talk a little bit later about there's much more specificity regarding that in state code. For example, special exceptions have to be consistent with the comprehensive plan, but you'll see in the state code that there's a direct linkage between zoning and comprehensive plans. That's not just a feel-good statement. There is a law that gets more specific about that. 61C allows the planning commission to require zoning support information and sets a time limit within which to make a recommendation. We're going to go over that more in detail a little bit later. And the applicant, recognizing the magnitude of the proposed development and the amount of information that could possibly be necessary, they have gracefully waived the time limit. So there's no time constraints on your decision, but of course we want to be respectful to the applicant. We don't want to drag this out forever, waste their time, waste resources. So just wanted to let you know that. So the specific ordinance, so when a rezoning is requested, an ordinance is drafted, a standalone ordinance. And this ordinance 536 was submitted to City Council for a first reading, as are all ordinances, in May of 2022. And the first reading is just an introduction. It's where the City Council acknowledges that it's received this. And then immediately after that first reading, once it was read into the record, they forwarded to you, the Planning Commission, to do your what you need to do for those other sections. Section 1 of that ordinance, this is, from specifically from the ordinance that's in front of you and in front of back to the city council at some point, talks about the specific parcels and the areas to be rezoned in number 1. And it mentions that it shall be consistent with a final site plan determined by the planning commission as being in full compliance with the city code. So again, there was a site plan associated with the rezoning, and it's the applicant's idea to work through the details of the site plan as part of the rezoning process. But section 2 of that ordinance states that the city's comprehensive plan is hereby amended as necessary to make the approved site plan consistent therewith. So that's the section that I didn't really agree with, but it's what we have in front of us in this ordinance. That section 2 makes it sound like whatever you come up with the site plan, if you're happy with it, the comprehensive plan is sort of automatically amended to make it consistent therewith. So that was ordinance language that was requested by the applicant and accepted as a first reading by the city council. So Delaware Code, Title 22, Chapter 7, under Planning Commission states that the comprehensive plan shall be the basis for the development of zoning regulations as permitted pursuant to Chapter 3 of this title. So based on that, it's our recommendation that the Planning Commission first consider the merits of amending the comprehensive plan before you get into the details of the site plan and the rezoning. So that's been some of the confusion that we've had over the last several months. We're trying to avoid getting into the details of the site plan and talk about the overall universal merits of this project in this location from a comprehensive plan level. And that's what we hope to start tonight. And I think the chair mentioned, but I certainly don't mind questions as we go along. I kind of prefer to, break things up a little bit. Again, a lot of words straight from state code. What is a comprehensive plan? It's maps containing at a minimum development strategy, about population, housing growth, expansion of your boundaries, community character, general uses of land. The comprehensive plan process shall coordinate with other municipalities and jurisdictions. I quoted the second part, 702A. I think this is very important. I think this gets lost a lot. The planning commission established by any incorporated municipality under this chapter shall prepare a comp plan for the city or town. It's your plan. It has to be approved. The comprehensive plan has to be approved by city council, but it's one of your primary duties as a planning commission to prepare a comprehensive plan. So that's very standard enabling legislation in states, that it's typical for state codes to grant that responsibility and that authority to a planning commission. That it's your responsibility to create the plan. You create the plan, you adopt it, and then you offer it up to the legislative body for their adoption. The last section, just to remind us that there is a state role within the comprehensive planning process, that prior to adoption of any comprehensive plan or amendment, it has to be referred to the cabinet committee. And well, first it has to be reviewed by PLUS, and then it ultimately has to be certified by the cabinet committee and the governor. But ultimately, the municipality or county has the right to accept or reject any or all of the recommendations. The final decision on the adoption of the comprehensive plan is that of the municipality or county. So it's a lot of responsibility, and this is a constant struggle between states and local jurisdictions. And this is a classic deferral of local land use decisions to the locals. The state has a role. It guides you in certain directions. They're going to make comments. They have state spending strategies that incentivize growth where they think it should be. And this incentivizes growth where they don't think it should be by funding. But ultimately, comprehensive plan is the municipality's decision. Stole some slides from the Institute for Public Administration from the University of Delaware. I know a lot of you are relatively new to the Planning Commission and have not had the chance to have training through the Institute of Public Administration, but they offer this once a year to new Planning Commission members. So this is not my slide, but it's a good one, and I reference it appropriately. It's one of the famous quotes of a famous case in the state of Delaware is the judge likened the comprehensive plan to a constitution. It's all encompassing. It deals with physical aspects of your municipality. It's long range. It's a guide for development. It's an ongoing process. So not a big fan of amending the comprehensive plan willy-nilly, all the time. That's not what it's intended to be. It's built into the state code that every 5 years you have to review your comprehensive plan and make sure that it's still on target, that it still has the right, that you're still happy with it. And every 10 years you have to go through the readoption process. So 5 years, you're supposed to take a look at it. Is it, do we still have these same goals? Do we still have the same vision? Is there something that we should change, something that we're not happy with? So that's one of the purposes for the slide saying ongoing process. Another stolen slide from IPA. It shows you how central the comprehensive plan is to various municipal functions, capital improvement programming, community design. Probably most importantly is the zoning and subdivision and land use codes. The zoning and subdivision regs are they are the most important implementation tool of any comprehensive plan. But the comprehensive plan also guides your environmental protection regs, growth annexation, code enforcement. And then there's some plugs for some state stuff and through IPA. Also from IPA, a little wordy, but the state code has prescribes the different components of any comprehensive plan and has different elements that are required for jurisdictions over 2,000 people. So you can see the breadth of issues that any comprehensive plan has to deal with, and in your case, it has to address economic development, community design, water and wastewater systems, public and private uses of land. So again, it's comprehensive in nature. It's central to a lot of decisions that the city has to make, from financing to capital improvements, and more particularly land use. Now, getting into the comprehensive plan's direct relationship with zoning, state code 22 subsection 702C. Comprehensive plan shall be the basis for the development of zoning regulations as permitted in chapter 3 of the code. So the state code mandates that within 18 months of adoption of a comprehensive plan, that the municipality or jurisdiction rezone the land consistent with the comprehensive plan. And most of the time, not most of the time, there is a suggested land use map or future land use map that's in a comprehensive plan. And this requirement of the state code requires that you rezone the land within 18 months to be consistent with your comp plan. And after a comp plan is, or any portion has been adopted in accordance with the chapter, the comprehensive plan shall have the force of law, and no development shall be permitted except as consistent with the plan. Most of the time, that consistency is guided by its consistency, or any particular development's consistency with zoning ordinance and the subdivision regulations. Every now and then, where there's a gray area, you can look to the comprehensive plan for guidance, but most of the detailed, code requirements that are tied back to the comprehensive plan are in the zoning ordinance or subdivision reg. So this is an example of a direct relationship between a comprehensive plan and zoning from your 2009 comprehensive plan. Again, very wordy, you don't have to get into the words, but the 2009 plan suggested there be mixed use development in the Ferry Cutoff and 7th and South Street areas. This is directly from the 2009 plan. It showed the area in question. It provided some guidance about what the comprehensive plan envisioned for those areas. It is easy to envision, 7th and South Street is easy to envision this area as new residential neighborhood, extending the built form, character, and scale of the district southward, the historic district southward. So that's comprehensive plan language. That's pretty general, but it identified an area that it thought was, the planning commission identified an area that it thought was underutilized and could use redevelopment, and provided this guidance for future land use tools to redevelop that area. So that is from your 2009 plan. And this is a map from the 2009 plan that trying to mouse, but this is the Ferry Cutoff area, and there is the 7th and South Street area, and table 16 of the 2009 plan says, land use recommendation, mixed use for the 7th, for the Ferry Cutoff and 7th and South Street, mixed use development. Even provided, the acreage and whether it was publicly or privately owned. And that's just, there's the number, actually there's a typo, that should be 21. And there's 13 referring to Ferry Cutoff. Then in 2013, the zoning ordinance was amended to create the downtown gateway district. 5, 7, 8 pages of zoning ordinance that was created. And the zoning ordinance was amended to create that DG zone to implement what we just read in the comprehensive plan. And these areas were proactively rezoned by the city to DG. Wasn't easy. None of this is easy. There was controversy with some of the landowners there when there's a proactive rezoning, but that's a classic example of what's envisioned by the state code, where you do a comp plan, you have a vision for an area, you make some recommendations in the comprehensive plan, and then when that's done, you go about writing the really tough zoning regulations that impact what you can do with that property. So those properties are now zoned DG. So let's talk about the current plan, your 2020 comprehensive plan. This is the map 3 suggested land use. You can see the various categories of suggested land use. The subject parcel that's the subject of the rezoning ordinance is designated as light industrial office park. But you can see the very general categories. Those are not zoning categories per se, but they are. There you go. Push the right button. So in the 2020 plan, the Planning Commission determined that the existing zoning should be the guide for future land use. That there was a lot of discussion about future land use for the 2020 plan, and what ended up happening is that the Planning Commission just took the zoning map and aggregated different zoning types, you know, the different residential zones, the different commercial zones, the different, those different zones and created those general suggested land use. So really, the 2020 comprehensive plan really didn't make any changes, didn't really envision any changes from the current zoning. So there is no new DG, for example, in the 2020 plan. But it also recognized that this is, again, I'm not trying to paraphrase anything, that bottom language is direct from the plan. After multiple discussions, the suggested land use map was created. It's difficult to predict future opportunities. And it recognizes that the planning commission and city council may entertain applications to change the suggested land use map and zoning map on a case-by-case basis. And if considered, the application would require a comp plan amendment. So while it didn't make any proactive changes like in 2009 with the downtown gateway areas, it did recognize that applicants may come forward and ask for such a change.
Can I ask a question on the map before map 3? The area that's zone light industrial also contains a school, and that's not indicated on there, which it would have been an exception. So I'm just wondering how that works. Like, somebody made an exception, and there's a plot in there that has a different meaning. You know, whatever you want to call it, comprehensive plan, exception, zoning. You know, I still think we need more clarity here about the hierarchy of these things, but why isn't it shown on here?
Because it was zoned, because it is zoned light industrial office park. So there's probably an existing land use map in the 2020 plan that may call that institutional. I'm not sure, but you know, what the 2020 plan did is if it was zoned this, it became this. So it was a very generalized aggregation of existing zoning to create the suggested land use. It wasn't.
I understand that. My question is different though. We have a little island in the middle that's something else. So why doesn't it appear on the map as something else?
You probably have that in a lot of cases because it's not, again, this is based on zoning. So I think the school was permitted as a special exception some time ago, as certain uses are permitted as special exception in the industrial office park. I don't have the detailed history of how the school was, you know, permitted, but I know that the industrial office park zoning does allow uses that are in the family of uses that are permitted in the industrial office park, and we're gonna see the uses that are permitted in that zoning. So I don't know the details of how or when the school got there from a land use permitting standpoint, but I do know that zone, that there is a provision in that zoning district to allow other uses by special exception, which is approved by the Board of Adjustment after a recommendation by you.
Is it, I did read through this, but is that in here somewhere, the list of all the things that are possible exceptions?
On page 22, it has a chart of the by right in industrial office park zoning district. And one of them is daycare center, kindergarten, preschool, or day nursery. So probably, I think the school K-8, it was probably a special exception. But there's a number, it's not just manufacturing warehouses. There's a number of by right.
Yeah, and what I didn't put, we'll get to that slide, but what I didn't put in there is the specific language about special exceptions. And I didn't bring a hard copy of my code, but so other components of the comp plan that may or may not be pertinent, but I didn't want to leave them out. As an abundance of caution, I added a bunch of slides that, you know, you may have questions about, but but you may not find pertinent relative to your eventual deliberation. So, somebody may ask, well, what's the population projection? What does the 2020 plan say for population projections? And this is what it says. It makes a very modest, this is based on the Delaware Population Consortium, which is a offshoot of the state planning department. And there are demographers that use a lot of data to predict population growth, but it is a classic planning statement to say that the smaller the jurisdiction, the smaller the area you're dealing with, the less reliable projections are. Because one development comes or gets approved or doesn't get approved, and your whole projection is out of whack or is on target. So for small urban areas, small cities, it's not really pertinent, but I wanted to put it in here just to make sure that you guys were aware of it.
Can I ask a question?
Mhm.
Was the population growth considered in when doing the new comprehensive plan, 2021?
Yeah, this is it.
But it was considered in when they were developing.
Yeah, I mean, there's no, so you can see it's very,
Stagnant.
very, very modest. So, people think that there's this real scientific methodology of predicting what population should be and figuring out what our build out is of our land use, but that really doesn't happen because there are private property rights at stake. So there is a suggested future land use, but nowhere in the plan does it say that it will make this happen or not happen. This is just data in the plan for background information.
It's extrapolated data. Therefore,
Well,
meaningless.
I don't know if it's extrapolated, but Delaware Population Consortium has pages and pages of how that was created. But the point being, the smaller, it's meaningless because of the small geography. And those are the latest. This is not from your comprehensive plan. These are 20 projections from 2021. And looks like there is a modest increase projected from the previous projections. Again, I didn't want to leave stuff out. People may be interested, well, what does the housing element of our comprehensive plan say? What are our housing strategies? Should we be considering those when we're considering this application? I'm not going to read through these, but these are in the plan, they're in the presentation, and they're just there for your edification and for your background. A lot of words, same thing. These are continuations of housing strategies. But remember, we went through some strategies when we did your annual report that went to City Council that they reviewed just recently. So these are some of the things that maybe not housing strategies, but other strategies that are in your comprehensive plan that you felt were important and were action items you felt necessary to forward to the City Council as an important thing to have happen over the next so many years.
Can we just go back to the housing element goals? I think we glossed over that, and that's kind of important to the commission. I see what looks like the number one is increase affordable opportunities for homeownership. Kind of important, and would be a factor that we might want to consider, right? Improving the integrity of housing stock through rehabilitation. If that's important to us, this project is not focused on that, right? So it's not in our top three. Facilitate investment in small rundown residential properties, also not meeting the objective. I don't know what we're going to end up deciding, but if these are the goals that were set out that all of us newbies are supposed to be going for, I think it's worth spending a minute to understand what those goals are, because people spend a lot of time to put this thing together, and that is where they said they wanted Newcastle to go, right? So, and I see a lot of focus on single family units. which, again, there's some in the proposed development, but there's an awful lot around here that need a lot of work and incentives to make them better. So I just want to point that out. I think we skim by some of these things, and actually they provide guidance for decision making.
Yeah, I didn't mean to skim over them. I'm just trying to be careful of time.
Thank you.
Did so not to rush through this, those are some of the additional strategies. So a question has been asked, what are some previous comprehensive plan amendment examples? So your previous plan, we haven't had any for the 2020 plan, but we had some previous, in my time, we had amendments to propose for the 2009 comprehensive plan in 2018 and 2020. However, they addressed the suggested land use to parcels that were undesignated. So without getting into a lot of discussion, the previous comprehensive plan, the 2009 plan, only identified suggested land uses for relatively undeveloped areas. So there was only, 20 or so examples of what the suggested land use should be. Now, in a built environment, 95% of your time, the existing land use is going to be the future land use. So I guess the previous plan only felt that it was important to suggest the land use where that was relatively undeveloped, and where it was. Let's see, it's the next slide. And where a parcel did not have a designation, and somebody asked for a rezoning, we found that to be inconsistent with the comp plan. So, a little parcel in Buttonwood in Dobbinsville wanted a rezoning. And Dobbinsville has no suggested land use. So we just found it inherently inconsistent. So we made the applicant, we didn't make the applicant, we went through the comprehensive plan amendment process at the same time that we did the rezoning. But they were very small parcels, and they were tied to a rezoning. Right? I don't find that comparable to this situation. Because again, there were no suggested land uses designations to the other comprehensive plan amendment examples. So, yeah.
Sorry, may not know it's off the top, but do you have examples of situations where the rezoning was rejected based on pre-existing designations?
Not off the top of my head, but yes.
Okay.
I mean, if an applicant knew what they were doing and they felt that the rezoning was inconsistent with the comprehensive plan amendment, they would be asking for a comprehensive plan amendment along with the rezoning. That's done a lot in Delaware. I don't agree with it, and I certainly don't that they're one and the same. Not one and the same, that they're part of the same application. So what's happening here is done throughout the state. Right. That ordinance 536, but I don't think it's done to the magnitude of this development, of this potential development.
I guess what I'm asking is I'm just trying to find parallels. And I guess with consistency regarding, a reason to rezone as opposed to, and also a reason not to rezone, would be somewhat consistent. But, so I guess that's why I'm looking forward. But, you know, I want to see situations where obviously we, you know, rezoning was approved. But we should also try to see situations where rezoning was not approved. I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, yes. What I'm suggesting is the rezoning requested in this case, if we're talking about this case,
Right.
is inconsistent with the comprehensive plan.
Right.
And that's appears to be a given to me, that this mixed use development is inconsistent with the industrial office park designation in the comprehensive plan. So what I'm asking is that we consider the merits of the comprehensive plan change, to allow the zoning to allow this development. So I don't think it's a question of should you recommend approval or disapproval of the rezoning based on the comprehensive plan. The question that I'm hoping to try to get to is, do you feel that the comprehensive plan, do you feel that this project in this location is a good idea from a comprehensive plan standpoint? That's the takeaway from this. I didn't really get to yet, but and in order to get to that, is it a good idea or not? We need to talk about the city and county zoning regulations, because this gets to the surrounding land uses of the property. This is the city zoning map, and this is consistent with what I was saying before regarding how the comprehensive plan map was created, that the comprehensive plan designation is, what was it, light industrial office? The zoning is industrial office park. This is the zoning designation. There's R1, R2, R3. So that entire area associated with the industrial park, more or less, except for those R2s and the historic commercial and some open spaces designated IOP. The subject parcel is right here.
Is it designated industrial because it was always designated industrial, or did somebody change their mind, or is it because it's right by the Crota plant, so it seemed like it was the right idea, or like how? Sorry to ask such a
No,
big question.
we'll
How
get,
did
I have a,
somebody-
we have, I can get to that in a second. It's a good question. So these are the types of uses that are permitted in the industrial office park, not that types of uses. These are the uses that are permitted in the industrial office park zoning. This is straight out of the city zoning ordinance. These are uses that are permitted by right, air quotes, in the industrial office park. Any of these uses would most likely need a site plan to be submitted to you. That's why I would say air quotes. But, you know, that's the term of planning, permitted by right. They don't need a rezoning. They don't need a special exception. They don't need a use variance. And they range from offices, for professional services, manufacturing, assembling, finishing, you know, all the way down to, or, you know, health, fitness centers, daycare centers, kindergarten, preschool, day nursery. So there's a range of uses that are permitted in the industrial office park zoning. What is a classic differentiating defining element of a industrial office park, light industrial, is that manufacturing and manufacturing and assembling is permitted. And it's probably something that it's not intended for heavy industrial use, outdoor storage, those type of things. So since we're on the fringe of the city, we need to talk about the surrounding county zoning designations and zoning requirements. So, get a better pointer. Obviously, this is the boundary of the city. This is the unincorporated areas, and this is not in the city. This is the city boundary right here. So this is the county zoning designation. That's zoned industrial. This is zoned heavy industrial, and that also, this is also zoned heavy industrial. And there's a little finger, this little finger of I, industrial is there. So that's industrial. And then this is heavy industrial. That's Dakota Plant and Delaware Bridge of Force. This is your typical existing community neighborhood conservation designation in the county. And it's not shown, but the Memorial Park is zoned suburban, I believe, but that's not going to change. Without getting into these are descriptions of the types of uses or the intent of those zoning categories in the county. You can see that the industrial zone is intended for the older industrial areas. Characters, many of these areas are existing industrial parks. In keeping with employment trends, a wider range of uses are permitted. Classic differentiation between industrial and heavy industrial. That the HI is to be used principally for larger heavy industrial developments not suited to other industrial districts. Typically have access to rail lines and navigable marine waterways. Should minimize adverse effects. And there's probably something in the regulations that permits outside storage. Now, I didn't, the UD, this is right from the county's Unified Development Code, which is the county's more or less zoning ordinance for what you can do with your land if it's in the county. And there is a whole table of industrial uses that if you want to, you go to the county UDC. I'm hesitant to do it here because I'm afraid I get lost. But I can provide that information if you want it. But there's a very long list of uses in the county zoning ordinance or the UDC, much like we have. Actually, the city doesn't have one, but it has dozens and dozens and dozens of uses and how those uses are permitted in the various zones. That would be heavy industry is permitted in the HI with a special permit in the county. But you can see the types of uses that, based on the existing land use, that are designated as heavy industrial in the county.
Can you translate OR and BP, please, in item D under industrial?
Those are county zoning designations that I do not know. I'm thinking that the BP is probably business park. And OR is office something. But I can get those for you. Again, I clicked that link to the UDC, but I'm nervous. In a PowerPoint presentation and Wi-Fi, and then I won't be able to get back in. So, getting more into site-specific issues as they relate to the subject parcel that I think are important in a comprehensive plan consideration. The site access is Lupin's Drive. It's about 36 feet in width. That can change. And I want to make a distinction between issues that can be mitigated as part of any site plan process that you could make a developer do as part of a rezoning condition of the city council or as part of the site plan, and those conditions that are not, that cannot be changed. So, you know, the road width, if you really thought the road needed to be wider for whatever reason, that, you know, that could be talked about as part of the rezoning, as part of the site plan process. I'm not saying that it has to be, or it doesn't have to be, but I'm just trying to make a distinction between things that can be mitigated and addressed physically as part of the site plan process or rezoning process, and those things that are sort of, to me, comprehensive plan in nature. It's 36 feet in width. It's about a mile long. It is not a through road. Buttonwood Avenue is closed to through traffic. Per DelDOT, the portion of Lucan's Drive between Cherry Lane and the railroad tracks, and I have a better display after this, is not owned and maintained by DelDOT. The portion from the railroad tracks to Steel Drive is intended to be dedicated to the city. There's approximately 26 access points onto Lucan's Drive from Cherry Lane to the subject parcel. There's no sidewalks, and per DelDOT, the proposed project would generate about 3,600 trips per day.
Could you explain what access points means?
Yes. Anywhere a parking lot or business has an access onto Lucan's Drive, I count that as an access point. So this is a little bit reoriented, not your usual way. No, the bridge is right here. So this is Lucan's Drive. This is the subject parcel. And according to DelDOT, the portions of Lucan's Drive, you know, this is in the city. This is outside the city. So according to DelDOT, and I haven't done a lot of research on this, the portion of Lucan's Drive from Cherry Lane to the railroad tracks is not owned by DelDOT. And according to, you know, the city, the applicant is intending at some point in the future to dedicate the portion of Lucan's Drive from the railroad tracks to some point to the end to the city. And that's typical. There's nothing unusual about that. They've built the road to city standards. It doesn't have a surface coat to it. It's got a base coat. And it's typical development procedure to build the road and keep the base course for some time until you're essentially built out, because you don't want the top coat, the final nice coat of asphalt to be ruined by a lot of construction traffic. So you often wait until you're almost ready to build out the site before you dedicate it to the public entity. And municipalities want that too. A lot of times municipalities won't take roads until the site's 80%, 90% built out, because they don't want to take the road while there's still a lot of construction traffic and then be responsible for maintaining it. So does anybody have any questions? This is Buttonwood. There is a physical fence right here, and it's my understanding of talking to city staff that I don't know how long it's been like that, but there is a fence there to cut off employee traffic and truck traffic from going through Buttonwood. So Lucan's Drive is a one-way in and one-way out to Cherry Lane and Drive. To me, that's one of those things that doesn't change. That you know, unless there's something the applicant's going to propose something that is a comprehensive plan type issue.
Chris, so you're saying part of Lincoln's Drive is county and part is city?
I don't know. All I know is DelDOT said they don't own this. And if this moves forward, if you think the comprehensive plan amendment has merit, then we'll get into details of what need, is that, let's get into the details of making sure that there's public access to the site. But I didn't track that down. Some of the history of the industrial park. To your question, Commissioner. So the River Edge Industrial Park was annexed in 1993. And as part of the annexation petition and agreement, that's when the industrial office park zoning classification was created. So it was actually part of the annexation that they created the IOP zoning district. And all of those uses that it's been modified over the years, but it's more or less same structure. That's when that zoning was created, and it was created for this annexation, for this, for what makes up River Edge Industrial Park in the
It's not
city.
unique to our city, is it? Aren't there other places in the state where there's similar zoning, or is this
Oh.
unique to our city?
There's certainly other zoning that is similar, but that no, this is zoned industrial, so it's unique in the city to this industrial park.
Right, but there's other ones, other places, so did they just copy other designations, or did they completely make up this description especially to this place? And it's unique to
I
this
mean,
city.
there's similars on it. I'm sorry.
I think she means, but within the state, there are other designations that mirror this.
Yes. So it's your classic light industrial, and it was probably negotiated because they were talking to the city about, what do we, if we annex you, what can we envision? And it was the city's way and the applicant, petitioner's way of, proving that, only these types of uses are going to go here. If you annex us, here's the range of things that we're going to do.
Understand.
Impacts of sea level rise. The city, through DENREC in 2018, created the vulnerability assessment and adaptation plan. And again, I'm not trying to paraphrase anything. There's a long quotation from the inside cover that talks about how the sea level rise elevations were, what sea level rise elevations were considered in the vulnerability assessment, and the increase in floodplain elevations that were assumed were elevations of 2 feet, with worst case of 5 feet by 2100 can be anticipated. So I'm sure I think the applicant is going to get into this, but this is the plan that the city's been using to move forward with their sea level rise evaluations. This is a map from the plan. This is the existing 100-year floodplain. You can see how it impacts the site. This is the sea level. This is the 100-year floodplain in the year 2100, 2050, and 2100. And again, these are based on worst case scenarios. And I have a better description of that in the next slide, I believe. And the purpose of this plan was to identify structures that were vulnerable to sea level rise and flooding, or flooding based on sea level rise. So this language is related to the structures, but it also speaks to the elevation and how it was achieved. The structures and roads impacted by future flooding are features where the lowest ground elevations are lower than the storm surge elevations, plus the sea level rise heights of 2 feet and 5 feet by the years 2050 and 2100 respectively, using the high parentheses or worst case scenario. So I'm not a sea level rise expert. If you want more information on this as part of your additional zoning support, we can get it. This is just an existing report that's out there that may or may not be part of your deliberations. So next steps.
What can you conclude from this? We go back and get a conclusion, like what does this mean?
That means that if you assume that the worst case scenario and you accept the bathtub methodology, which you could have debates over that for hours, you can see that the floodplain will impact the site more than it is now. And that's going to equate some elevation on the site that I think the applicant is going to speak to, that I didn't want to try to draw that line to elevation 12 on their site, but in regulatory terms, residential structures in the floodplain today, in today's floodplain, the first floor has to be elevated 1.5 feet above the floodplain. That's called the freeboard. I think, and that is part of city being eligible for flood insurance help from FEMA. Non-residential structures within floodplain have to be elevated, or they can be flood proofed. You can make a building that is non-residential that is in the floodplain flood proof, but and you have to submit all sorts of calculations and architectural and structural engineering calculations showing that it can withstand the hydrostatic pressure of a 100-year storm surge.
Because it looks like the surrounding community is also heavily impacted here.
Yes, I didn't. I think the applicant's probably going to show the entirety of this. I'm not trying to cherry pick, this site, but the larger map shows. I mean, obviously, I only showed a portion of this, so I don't. If you want, if the applicant doesn't have the entire map, it's in this report that I can get to you.
Thank you.
And it's also on the city website.
Well, I guess I was making the point, though, that the entire area is compromised, right? So it's not just this one spot, and what my eyeball tells me is that a lot of their property that we're considering is actually above the floodplain. So I think that's worth making a note of. That's why I don't want to have data thrown at me. I want to discuss and understand
Yeah.
what this means.
So I guess the point is, today, a lot of it's above, but if you take into consideration projected sea level rise.
I know
That could be
Bentonwood's in
different.
serious trouble. That's what I'm reading from that, right? Much more trouble than this development area that's being proposed. That's the only point I'm making.
So next steps, you can seek additional zoning to support information as necessary. You have to have a public hearing, and then you eventually have to schedule a regular agenda item for your formal recommendation. So this is the section of the code that we talked about briefly before that allows you to seek additional zoning support information as necessary. That you can, your consideration can be accompanied by maps, charts, sketches, rationale, and other information as the planning commission reasonably deems necessary for the proper and effective consideration of such proposal. And there is a time limit that was associated with making your recommendation, but again, as we stated earlier, the time limit has been waived by the applicant. And I know I keep talking about zoning and rezoning, but again, I'll get to this at the end about if you need this information to make your determination about the merits of the comprehensive plan amendment. So there's been questions in the past about, are meetings public, or, when do we have to have a meeting and when do we have to have a hearing? So you have to have, the planning commission has to have its own public hearing for the rezoning ordinance that's in front of you. Property has to be posted, adjoining property owners are notified by certified mail. It's advertised in the newspaper, and it's a formal process. It's a separate item as part of your meeting, that you will open a public hearing, you will take public comment, you will close the public hearing, and then a lot of times you then go into a regular agenda items. And one of those agenda items could be a decision on the item for which there was just a public hearing. Sometimes you wait until the next meeting so you can sort of, digest all the information that you received at the public hearing. Other times, bodies make the decision at that regular meeting. So this is regarding the next steps regarding after the public hearing. So if the planning commission determines that a comprehensive plan amendment to allow for a mixed-use development as described in ordinance 536 does not have merit, you would recommend disapproval of the ordinance, since the zoning requested will be inconsistent with the comprehensive plan. And you would forward that recommendation to the city council for their consideration. If the planning commission determines that the plan amendment to allow for mixed-use development as described in the ordinance does have merit, I would recommend that the planning commission continue with further evaluation of the requested zoning and site plan, and that a future recommendation to the city council on ordinance 536 will then be based on the merits of the site plan and the zoning support information. So if you think that a mixed-use development of that type and that magnitude is a good idea in that location, then we get into the details of traffic and impacts to community services. And what are the impacts to sea level rise? I mean, how many buildings, what scenario are we going to accept? Should we make them push the buildings back? Should we make them elevate? Should we recommend that they elevate 24 inches? But I want you to consider the overall merits first before we get into the time-consuming and expensive details of the site-specific impacts. And does that make sense? Because that's my takeaway here. If you think it's a good idea, then we'll get into the details and we'll continue down the path as was suggested by the applicant in their request for that rezoning ordinance language, that they still will all be tied together. But if you don't think it has merit, there's no sense in getting into the details because of why you would think it doesn't have merit. And whatever your decision is, if you don't think it has merit, then you would state the reasons why and forward that to the city council. Then your work would be done. If you think it has merit, then there'll be some tricky language regarding the motion, but the bottom line is that we will continue down the path of further evaluation and refining the site plan.
I'm gonna go back to page 5, I apologize.
No, it's fine. I don't know if I just go forward.
In regards to the comprehensive plan being amended as necessary to make the approved site plan consistent, what other effects would it have based on, I mean, does that affect that whole area? Or just that small portion that they want to develop?
I think that language just means that it's amended by virtue of adoption of this ordinance. If the city council adopts this ordinance and there's a plan associated with it, the comprehensive plan is just amended. There's no other, there may be a map change, but it certainly will only be specific to that project in that site.
But that also would create a precedent for others who might want to change that area, right? So somebody buys a big warehouse next door and says, I too want to put multi-use dwellings on this property, and you let them do it, so you should let me. I mean, does that happen?
I think you consider everything on a case by case basis, but if, I don't know what the case law is in being able to, that would be a legal question and a practical question. I'm sure there's a legal precedent, if you allow this person to do it, there's probably legal precedent on a similar application, but it's also just, a practical component.
Just for my clarity, to Kirsten's question, is it just only for this parcel, right? We would only be making the variance for this parcel, correct?
Yes, it's variance is like a capital B, so I'm rezoning or comprehensive plan
Comprehensive
amendment.
plan is
Yes.
what we're considering.
Yes.
Right.
Other questions or clarifications before we go on to the applicant's presentation? And there'll be an opportunity after we hear both if you think of other things. Good. We'll be starting out.
Thank you, Chairperson. I'm going to let Ms. Williams swap out the computers just because she set it up initially and I don't want to mess it up. Perhaps just a suggestion, maybe we get time to have a 5-minute break while she does that, or
That's a nice idea. Anyone object?
get the sense of people might do that. Thank you.
7:43, 5 minutes, okay? You just stretch the legs. Come on, smile.
You'll have to line up back in the chair in order.
I know, that's true.
I think there are extra copies. The presentation.
She did. Aren't they in a box?
It could be in that box. No,
So
no,
you
no,
pitched
that's
these.
okay.
You got it on your chair and your desk?
No.
Oh, yeah.
No. Yeah.
Yes.
I'll be happy to make it.
Thanks, John.
earlier.
Don't rush her. She's doing good. It's all good. Better her than me.
I witnessed it earlier today. I've been here the whole time.
I said earlier, so, yeah, presentation, she's going first. She goes, "Oh, you didn't have a presentation."
Here we are.
Oh, yeah. Obviously.
I have. And they were shouting commands, the office.
Actually, I managed to stay at 9:30. So if you like,
They were, when they went by us, they were right side by side, like a double sign. Kind of thing. They're right there. We just got to sort of get out of the way. So there was really good police getting out of the city, but it was on the, they went by us, it was almost like the first turn. After we were. Second bar, and they went by us. So then we heard the sirens afterwards.
Well, there's a lot of stuff in there.
I picked them up on the way down.
Okay, yeah, I know. Sean, are you ready?
I am, sure.
All right.
Thank you.
Why don't we
Yeah.
She has a great. Vastly expanded.
All right, let's reconvene and Sean Tucker will give a presentation from the applicant.
Thank you, Chairperson. Thank you, board members, for your time. We were just over an hour on that presentation, and then Mr. Rogers covered a lot of material. I'm going to do my best to keep at a half an hour, which was my email commitment, but certainly I want to answer questions you may have as best I can. And to that end, thank you for postponing till tonight's meeting. I wanted to make sure we had as many consultants as we could have present. We could not accomplish that for your last meeting that we originally scheduled for, but tonight I'm happy to report that we have Nicole Klein with us, who's our traffic engineer with McMahon & Associates, Tom Diascanis, who is our civil engineer, Seth Shapiro, who is our land planner, and Mario Ingemi, who is representative of the owner, as well as Nicholas Pereira. Our environmental consultant could not make it tonight, unfortunately, but we got everybody but him. So we gave you the green lights to schedule us for tonight, and we appreciate that. They are the experts. I'm going to walk you through what I think is the clear Delaware law and city law that applies to the process of amending the comp plan, because I know that's what you're primarily focused on tonight. But I've assembled almost all of the other slides based on what we've learned from our experts who are here to be questioned by you should you have questions, and I think you probably will. So with that, let me jump into our first slide. As Mr. Rogers indicated, there's really three things happening here, but tonight it's just about the comprehensive plan amendment. First step, comprehensive plan amendment. Second step, rezoning. Third step, site plan approval. The ordinance that was introduced to council covers all three. And I will share with you, at least in my experience over the past 20 years, I have not proposed a rezoning where we have not done all three in one ordinance. So to me, this is commonplace. This is an efficient and appropriate way to proceed. The way we're proceeding was discussed with the city solicitor at some length, and he agreed and concurred. And so the ordinance was properly introduced and follows longtime practice, particularly in Newcastle County. The idea of doing these things together is so we're not coming back to you 3 times. We're not going to council 3 times. We're not going to plus more than once. People change on planning boards. People change on council. You could go and do one part, and there's a certain makeup of the planning board and council, and you go back into the next part. There's a different. By putting these together, you surely have the ultimate in transparency in terms of the land use process, because you're seeing everything as one group at one time. So that's important to me. You know, I think it is perfectly logical for the city to proceed in this way. And I respect Mr. Rogers' opinion, certainly he disagrees, but you know, again, common practice, and I actually think there's a lot of merit to it. So thank you for bearing with us. Step 1, amendment to the comp plan. What is the process to do that? As Mr. Rogers indicated, when your 2020 comp plan was adopted, there was very specific language in that comp plan about how it can be amended between comp plan update cycles, which are typically 5 years. After a comp plan or a portion thereof has been adopted, it does carry the force of law in Delaware. So what's in the comp plan, and it's not just, you know, the summary that you saw, because that would take, this plan would take quite some time to go through, but here's the plan. The whole plan has the force of law in Delaware once it's adopted. There's a lot of material. A lot of it doesn't apply to us, but some of it certainly does. And I'm going to try to highlight that for you tonight. But it does carry the force of law. So when you read it, you see very specifically on page 39, the Planning Commission and City Council may entertain applications to change the suggested land use map and zoning map on a case-by-case basis, as Mr. Rogers also referenced. That has the force of law. So we're properly before you, and ultimately properly before council, pursuant to this legal provision that lets us come and others come. So that precedent is embedded into the law. Everybody has the right to come in and seek an amendment. And again, I'm not familiar with an amendment I've sought to a zoning code that didn't also seek an amendment to a comp plan, which is, again, I think very commonplace in Delaware. Now, one of the things I just want to mention real quickly, I didn't capitalize the word suggested land use map, but that is language in the comp plan, suggested. It was clear to me when you read the comp plan that the drafters, which included a prior planning board, maybe some of you were on, and council wanted to leave some flexibility in that regard. And in fact, one of the things mentioned in the comp plan at page 39 is it is difficult to predict future opportunities. It is difficult to predict future opportunities. So it's logical that you would want to allow a case-by-case amendment process if one of your goals is to be flexible and fluid for opportunities. Some planners may dislike that. I think Mr. Rogers does and has expressed that. Other planners might like that flexibility. It's in the comp plan. So it is the force of law, and it is what I'm obligated to follow, or my client's obligated to follow. I did mention at a couple of our meetings, and I just wanted to confirm it, my client did come before the city when this comp plan was being worked on in October of 2020. There's actually a neat little public comment summary that the city kept track of. It looks like PCI was involved, and we dug through the records and actually found where my client had come in, talked about doing mixed use on the site. The plan didn't get adopted until December 2020, so there's 2 months left in the process, but I think it was just a little bit too close for folks, and they recommended he come back later. Hence, we're back later. So just wanted to confirm there was confirmation that my client did attempt during the process to seek a similar amendment. What are the standards to apply? What are the legal hooks, if you will, to apply when you're weighing a potential amendment to a comp plan? What I did is I took a look at the ordinance 528 that adopted your current comp plan, the 2020 plan. And here are the things that were referenced in that ordinance that were relied upon by city council when they adopted it. Did the provision or did the comp plan advance legitimate government interest? Was it rationally related to a legitimate government interest? Was it reasonably related to a legitimate government interest? So any change would logically follow. Is this a good thing? Does it advance a legitimate government interest? And there are goals and strategies in your plan I'm going to talk to that we believe we're entirely consistent with this evening, even though we're also seeking an amendment because the map, as Mr. Rogers pointed out, doesn't match up directly with mixed use. Some examples of legitimate government interests that are given. Is it for the convenience of the public? Does it help the prosperity of the public and the citizens of Newcastle County? Does it provide order? Does it help the welfare of present and future inhabitants? Short story, you've got a lot of discretion. That's what all that means. If your recommendation is based on legitimate government purposes, to advance legitimate government interests, e.g. making the town better, e.g. helping the citizenry, you're falling within the scope of these types of words and phrases. By the way, this language is used throughout the state and comes primarily from the General Assembly and your general zoning authority. So it didn't surprise me when I peeled this back to find this language. These are some of the things that I would recommend consider, and we ask you to consider when deciding whether our proposed amendment to the comp plan is good. As you can see, the existing zoning in the city in the area of our property right around here on this map, you see a lot of different zoning. You see residential here, you see residential here, you see industrial here, IOP here in the light purple. So you already see around us a mix of uses. It's not all one. There is certainly a office park, but you see immediately around its perimeter, even within the city, residential and pure industrial. And there's multiple types of residential ranging from R1 to R3 down here in the corner. Just give you a sense of the character of the area. And was mentioned earlier, we do have a school that was lawfully built just south of where we're proposing this project. It's a charter school. It's approximately 800,000 square feet. It is lawfully operating today. It is part of the character of this park. There's no way you put that genie back in the bottle. So anybody who analyzes this site can't ignore what's there. You can't ignore that there's office. You can't ignore that there's warehousing, and you can't ignore an 800,000 square foot charter school that is predominantly residential in nature, although it probably is institutional by code. It lends itself to being next to or in close proximity to residential. And I'll drill down into that a little bit more, but I think the reasons are, leap to mind pretty easily why that makes a lot of good sense. And as you may recall from one of our earlier meetings, we met via Zoom at the charter school and their board, and they do support this project being located next door to them. They were not interested in a logistics park, office, warehousing, and all the truck traffic that comes with that directly next to their school. And that is for good reason and very logical if you're in their shoes. Now, mention a little bit about the different mix of zoning inside the town limits. And I stole one of Mr. Rogers' slides or copied it And wanted to point out, as he did, but I wanted to also mention a little bit more the NC5. That NC5 zoning, that's residential, that's Collins Park. You probably all knew that. And just to give you an idea of its size, for comparison purposes, it is 43 acres in size. It has approximately 600 lots. It's approximately 1,000 feet from the corner of Collins Park to the front corner or frontage of our property. Now, it's not interconnected, but it is a residential use. It's a significant residential use. It has more residential lots than our project does, within 1,000 feet or so, point to point. And you can determine that by actually going to the Newcastle County parcel view. There's a measuring tool. You can drop down and actually measure parcel to parcel and get centimeters, feet, whatever. I took a look at it. It's just over 1,000 feet, give or take, distance. So we had this mix of use. You have residential, you have industrial, you have heavy industrial. You've also got a mix inside the city of all these uses here along the I-295 corridor by the bridge. Not a surprise, quite frankly, to see those types of mix of uses in this area in my experience, particularly next to an interstate or in close proximity. This map are the municipal boundaries for the city in total. And I wanted to show this briefly to show or demonstrate all the residential that is in the area. There is certainly the residential I mentioned in the city, but look at all the residential in the county and the immediate area. And again, its proximity to 295 shouldn't come as a surprise. That is ideal from a density standpoint, to have your density closer to major roads than further away. At the same time, we're only about 1.5 miles as the crow flies from Delaware, the main street coming into the city. If you were to snap a line, and I did on this tool, you get about 1.5 miles. You also get 1.5 miles from our site, give or take, as the crow flies to the new Newcastle County Library. Give you some sense. So in appropriate weather, that's certainly bikeable. It's certainly walkable. In not so good weather, it's certainly drivable. But folks are not as far apart from downtown as you might think at first blush. And there's certainly other communities in the city nearby that are also further from the town. Again, it's where you want to live, and it's where you can afford to live in some instances. It's how close you might be to the core of the city. This certainly, though, does present our project opportunities for new housing in the area, which was one of the goals in the comp plan that Mr. Rogers had up on the screen. There's certainly some others I want to touch on briefly this evening. I wanted to show you real quick the levels map. This is the state strategies and investment map. This is also in your, I believe it's also cross-referenced in your comp plan. And it just confirms that this property, which is located in this general area here, is in a level 1 and level 2 area where development is proposed. And the plus comments mention that too. There's some gray out of play. We're preserving that, not building on that. That's highly environmentally constrained. The vast majority of the site is constrained and it's being preserved. But we are in a level 1 and level 2 area. Those are areas that are earmarked for growth, infrastructure, investment generally. The state will tell you in its description of these areas. And so what does that mean? It's earmarked for growth, whether it's industrial or mixed use. That's what we're here about tonight. But some, I think, who may have spoken in the past might have the idea the site is not necessarily developable or won't be developable. No, it is an area that is generally recognized for growth now or growth in the near future. And one of the things in particular the plus comments point out about the state strategies and investment map is it's ideal for infill projects. In fact, they're expected in these areas. This is a classic infill project. You'd be hard pressed to find a better example of an infill project. You've got an industrial/office park that is built out. This is really the only remaining parcel. Infill development is strongly encouraged as a planning tool because you have existing infrastructure in place in most instances. And that, of course, minimizes greenfield development.
Ask a question.
Certainly.
It's just for my ignorance, and it may have already been covered, but does your client own this property already?
Yes. Yes. Ma'am. Perfect. And I just wanted to give you a size or scale reference here of the property. As was mentioned by Mr. Rogers, it's approximately 168 acres. The parcel line, excuse me, is the black line. Mouse is not cooperating. Here we go. A very large piece. As you can see, again, the majority of it is not being developed. It is constrained and is being preserved as part of this project. Now to drill down, this is the same we've shared in the past, but I just wanted to highlight it. The 451 units on 168 acres in the breakout of the unit types that offer a range of affordability. They also represent, if you think about it, the really only significant new housing stock. As you all know, building codes get amended just like zoning codes. And if you think about where you might want to live, and if you really want a new energy efficient, current cutting edge building code home, this is going to be very attractive to you. If you're into green technology and the environment, a new home that is built to current standards with insulation and heat pumps, that is something especially millennials find very desirable. Doesn't mean old houses don't have their character. Some of the most beautiful houses, of course, are in our city here. I was fortunate, I may have mentioned this before, to have lived on 3rd Street and rented a home there, or a floor in a home from Joe Toner, 144 East 3rd Street. And while I was in school, my wife and I lived there. But when I got done school, really couldn't find an affordable place in the town, unfortunately. And there wasn't really any new housing stock nearby, so we went elsewhere. And this does provide an opportunity, a rare opportunity, for folks who would like to be tied to the town in some way, have an interest in the town, they live there today, currently, here today, who would like to have some other options with the newer homes. This certainly would provide that. This is a rendering that you've seen in the past, or very similar to a rendering you've seen in the past. This is what my client intends to build. That scenery is taken from actual photos. That's not made up. Maybe the sailboats you won't see out there right now. I was by the site last week and drove through slowly from front to back. And I will say, and I would think anybody here who may have driven by recently, that picture doesn't do those views justice. Those views will be lost if this is developed as a logistics center or a big warehouse. They will be available to the public if this project moves forward. There are not many views like that left along the water, along the river here in Delaware. Views, beautiful, beautiful. And I encourage you, if you've not been by recently, to drive by slowly. And you appreciate it more driving out, I think, than you do driving in. But the views are absolutely beautiful. And this represents, again, the architecture that my client seeks to build, the material type, and the general style and architecture. Now, one of the things, so again, that you could make an informed decision for what is perhaps not perfect, but ideal for this property. And I think reasonable people could debate at some length over whether we need another warehouse on Lucan's Drive, or whether a mixed-use project would be as good or not, or better. But how do you do that unless you actually compare what the two represent? And so what we asked our engineer to do was prepare a concept plan to show what could be cited conceptually. This is not obviously going through any approval process yet, but what could be cited conceptually within the 100-year floodplain. Some of the parking, there's some edges that may touch the floodplain, but what could you generally fit here? And you can fit about 560,000 square feet. 2 buildings could definitely fit here under the existing zoning as by right.
Mr. Tucker, was that total?
Yes, and I'll have that on my next slide. just to confirm the exact size. So that is 562,500. And there's a couple little areas you can probably see better on your pictures that I handed out, than you can see on here where the floodplain pierces or just crosses the edge of parking. So you're probably within 10,000-20,000 square feet if you want to stay out of that completely, although it's not uncommon to get relief to do some filling for those types of things. And so, assuming we put up 2 big boxes, what would the trip generation be, right? Because that's a fair question. If we're going to consider mixed use instead of a logical use that would or could be built today, and we're seeing these go up in the area, how would it compare in terms of vehicles and trips? So our traffic engineer, again, who's here tonight to answer questions, took a look at that. If you look at average daily trips, that's the total trips during a 24-hour period, you're looking at approximately 3,622 trips for an industrial type development of this size and a typical fulfillment center, with 107 tractor trailer trips per day, 107. And this is generated from a manual that DelDOT uses called the Trip Generation Manual. So this isn't guesstimating. This is actually comes out of a manual that our DOT relies upon when they're scoping out traffic studies or other types of analyses. If you compare that to the proposed mixed use on average daily trips, we're at about 4,080. So when you talk about the length of the entire 24 hours, we generate, and again, this is rough math, but about 12% more traffic. No real tractor trailer traffic. There might be some minor deliveries and things of that nature, but no warehouse fulfillment center type trips. You will find out, however, because we did propose and volunteer to do a traffic study as part of this application, that DelDOT generally does not have a lot of interest in average daily trips for the guts of a traffic study. What they're interested in are the peaks, the AM and the PM, because that's rush hour. That's when you do have backing up and congestion. Certainly, you don't have it over the course of the non-peaks generally, and that's why they really don't study that. They'll use certain trip generation as threshold as to whether to study or not, but the guts in the heart of a TIS are the AM and PM. When you look at the AM and PM, an industrial development type use compared to a mixed use like we're proposing, you see that our trip generation is actually significantly less in the trip generation manual. That is just because of the nature of when trucks will be coming and going based on the DOT standard versus when a mixed use development is estimated to have trips coming and going and the times of day. So we are about half of the AM PM rush, and we're not going to have the much larger traffic generation of a tractor trailer. When I say larger, I mean the size of the vehicle. And I would submit to you that the proximity to the school here is something that should really be taken seriously and carefully when you're thinking about that. You can do the tractor trailers under the zoning today under that use option. This we would respectfully submit is a much better option given the school that is next door to us, which is there, it is real, it is operating, and it doesn't appear to be going anyplace. So for that reason, particularly trip generation reason, we think the mixed use is a much better option. Now, there were questions about the roads, and we thought we'd break that out for you with a little color coding here to help. The purple, privately owned and maintained. That is this coming off of Cherry Lane, coming back to the railroad tracks. That's privately owned. That's my client who privately owns that. So what's nice about that is that one of the things you can do to manage traffic is put in things that naturally reduce speed, that cause people to slow down. Now, this road, I believe, is 25, 35 in that range, but you can put in what are called traffic calming devices. And I'll let Nicole talk a little bit about that when we get to questions. I'm sure there'll be a question on that. She's the expert, not me. But a good example, I think, of that is in Greenville. When you're driving through Greenville, you'll notice they bumped out some of the curbing closer to the middle of the road. It naturally causes you see that to slow down. So there's different things you can do. Striping can do that. But having control over that area gives us some options coming into the park to consider with DelDOT and or the city, and it would probably mostly be the city, but we're happy to consult with DelDOT. And then in the green area, which actually passes our frontage, that is dedicated actually on a plan, on a record plan that our engineer dug up, but it has not been accepted yet by the city. So we still, when I say we, I mean my client, controls that, maintains that, and again, can modify that in concert with the city to either shrink it a little bit where the school and a mixed use project would be, or do other things like traffic calming with maybe curbing coming out. But the good news is we have the person or people in the room that can control that. So we have, and you rarely have that, by the way. You rarely have the people that own the road associated with the project. We have that here, which presents a unique opportunity, not just for us, but for the school that's operating under the existing road. And one of the things I asked our traffic engineer to do is to look at the code, your present code, and the road widths, just to compare where we might fall. And this is a section right out of the city code under its definitions. And Lucan's is 36 feet wide. The right of way, though, is 60 to 80. So 36 feet is paved, but the right of way is actually 60 to 80, which would allow the city, if it wanted to, once the road was dedicated, to expand it or not expand it, or my client before it would be dedicated or formally accepted. And it's already dedicated. Right now it's 36. That would qualify generally under your code as a secondary street. I note that it's only 6 feet wider than a residential street that would be dedicated to the city. So that's an extra 3 feet on either side. If that's any concern, again, we can put in some traffic calming maybe to pinch that a little bit, but I know streets came up and some concern over street width. Again, I'll defer to our traffic engineer, but she'll tell you that that does not, from a traffic engineering standpoint, create a safety concern or problem in her professional opinion. We're 6 feet wider than a residential street, and that can be managed.
I have just a quick question on that.
Sure.
if you don't mind. We drove down there and looked at it, but I didn't notice if cars were parked on the side of the street. Would it be set up so that cars could park on Lincoln's Drive, or would there not be parking allowed?
Right now, it's not set up that way, but it could be. It could be. That's certainly something we would be happy to talk to the city about if we get to that next stage, hopefully we will.
The kind of calming stuff you were talking about, you often see in places where there's parking and then there's the bump outs to try to.
It can be where there's parking, but sometimes there's not parking. It's designed to slow people coming into a town or an area when there's some sensitivity. I've seen it both ways. But I'll let Nicole, I don't know if Nicole wants to add anything to that. Ah, there she is. I've seen it done both ways, Nicole, but I don't know if you have a specific instance in mind.
Yeah, sometimes it's used to barrier parking. Sometimes it's also used just to provide a wider walkway in an area. So you really can utilize that space for a variety of different modes of travel, depending on the location and what the needs are.
Can I keep asking questions? I don't want to take away from the planning commission. Mr. Tucker, you mentioned the portion from Cherry Lane to the railroad tracks is privately owned, but you didn't mention any intent. Where did I miss it? Are you intending to keep it private, or is there some intention to have it somehow upgraded and dedicated to my client is happy to have that discussion with the city. I mean, we're not wedded one way or the other. We're more interested in what the city would want. Our preference at some point would certainly be to turn over anything because of long-term cost and maintenance, just to be very candid. I'm sure that wouldn't surprise anybody, but for now, my client is paying to maintain it, and we're open to comment and suggestions on that. Is there any history of having approached DelDOT?
I don't know the answer to that.
Mario's here, but he's not been a lifer on this project, so we can find out if DelDOT had an inkling. Certainly, certainly, I think, for example, sidewalks. We would certainly want to put in sidewalks along our frontage, but certainly it is, our next steps. We're talking to DelDOT and maybe some state legislators about getting money to add sidewalks throughout the park or in other areas of the park. As you know, DelDOT typically does things piecemeal when they add something new like bike lanes. We had a client who had to put a bike lane in 202 in front of one commercial establishment. Eventually, over the next 10, 20, maybe 30 years, we'll get bike lanes all the way down 202. But you have to start someplace. And this would be an ideal place to start with sidewalks, certainly.
And is that piece of road in the city?
Yes,
Is it
so.
private?
So right where the municipal line is, it's in the city, but then I think this part here, correct me if I'm wrong, column is partly in the county.
Yes, and that's why. Not or.
Yes. So the private part has not been dedicated to DelDOT yet, which is the magenta or light purple. The green does appear on a record plan that shows dedicated, but it's not been accepted by the city of Newcastle to the best of our knowledge. But we're still maintaining it.
So would the plan, if you were to add sidewalks to any area dedicated to the city, carry through to that private area as well?
Well,
Point of egress for,
right, good question. I would say that ideally, where's my list? Sorry. I don't know a minute ago, where did they go? Given the width, I would say that would logically fall. I haven't gotten to the slide yet. No, there it is. Back to the slide. You see that the right of way is 60 to 80. I
It's
believe.
60. The right of way for Lucan's Drive, its entirety is 60 feet. So the width of the actual road's only
The
36.
paving is 36.
So you've got 24 feet of additional right of way, 12 feet on each side. That would still be under the jurisdiction of whoever were to take it.
but I'm specifically talking about the magenta area that's privately owned, that's not city. That would be.
Do we know the width of that, Nicole?
It's the same. It's
But I mean,
consistent,
but
but
would the owner of that property keep that consistent if they were to add sidewalks through the green section dedicated to the city through to Cherry Lane as well?
Let's ask them. That's okay.
So the answer is we actually don't own as much of the property along that stretch. There's other private owners of that, so we have to work something out. We do own a little bit, and we can certainly try to make something happen there.
But you own the road.
We own the road.
Yes, and the road has the width.
We own, yeah.
You on the right.
So what
It's not-
Mario's
it's not in
talking,
the city, so.
right, so what Mario's talking about is people that own the lots.
Right.
Certainly he'd probably want to talk to before he put in the sidewalk, or, we've got money from DelDOT to put in the sidewalk. We'd certainly put it in on our frontage, but those lots are different.
And we have done that already at 90 Lucas. 90 Lucas, the warehouse is up and running, by the way. We're excited that we have a tenant moving in. And we did build sidewalk along that just to get things started. Just to get that little bit that, he mentioned earlier, trying to get things underway.
So is the private portion 60-foot right of way? I heard 60-foot right of way, and then I'm hearing the property owners own more, and you just own the road.
And I probably get confused. I mean, the lots next to it, which, assuming that the paved width remains at 36 feet, which means the lots that front it aren't ours. Does that make any sense?
So it's not a.
So it cannot be
And
expanded.
Let's just do one at a time here if we could. I think Nicole was the one who thought it was 60 feet for the private magenta area.
yeah, I mean, it would, even in that private area, you would never have your right of way set on a 36-foot roadway like that. We'll double check, but I believe that it's a 60-foot right of way consistently along Lucan's Drive from Cherry Lane all the way through. So there is right of way, 12 feet on either side. It should be on center the entire way, 12 feet on either side. But beyond that, the property has individual ownership in that section closer to Cherry Lane. But I do believe that the right of way is consistently 60 feet throughout in the entirety of Lucan's Drive.
So that means that DelDOT could build walkways on it, whether the owners liked it or not.
If DelDOT took ownership of the road.
I mean, that's what I think we're all trying to get to.
Yes.
Yeah.
I guess my point was, if we're gonna have walkways and they stop where the green meets the magenta, then you're not getting anybody out of your community. They're not getting to other areas.
No, I couldn't agree more. We have to start someplace though. And the sidewalk can be millions of dollars when you're retrofitting. And it's not uncommon to reach out to state legislators to try to get money for those types of things. This would be an opportunity to kick that effort off. It could possibly benefit the whole park in the future. Sea level rise, obviously a very sensitive topic. And we've heard a lot about it. We've learned a lot about it. We could not have Jim McCauley here this evening, but we did take a very close look at this. And he assisted us, as you might imagine, as our environmental consultant, as did Colin Diascanis, who helped on the engineering side. So what you're looking at here in this map is a tool that's available online, and it's offered by the state of Delaware. It's a mapping tool, and it allows you to put in a variety of different scenarios to look at sea level rise. And as you all probably know, sea level rise is not regulated by code. It is there is a floodplain, and we're out of the floodplain. We're going to talk about that in a moment too. But the 2050 mark of up to 2 feet or 1.9 feet that you saw from DENREC in the plus letter, and the up to 5 feet that you saw for 2100 is laid out here in this key. And so what we did is we took the maximum sea level rise, even though it's not regulated by code, even though we're not required to meet it by code. We took the 5 feet, which was the worst case scenario that was noted in DENREC's plus comments, using the bathtub model, which comes with some caveats, as you've all probably heard. And we laid it out. That's the mustard. And what you see in yellow are the boundaries of our project where we're proposing to develop the Colin Diascanis laid out. And as you can see, under the 5-year scenario of sea level rise, I'm sorry, 5 feet in the 2100 century. Get my numbers mixed up, apologize. You see that this area remains, at least where we're proposing to build, high and dry. And it is interesting. It is one of the fewer pieces along the river that is an elevation that keeps it high and dry. So we're fortunate in that regard. So I'm going to show you a slide in a moment that actually will break it out step by step. And again, this is modeling. There's, DENREC is guesstimating a little bit here. They use this bathtub model. If you read NOAA's website will tell you that the bathtub model is not site specific. So there's a lot of question marks when it comes to the sea level rise modeling. But we have used the state's website. It's available, and we've done the click the buttons. Our engineer has been involved in that, and we were able to in the 2100 scenario show even with a 5-foot sea level rise, we'd be high and dry in terms of residential construction on this site.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Was the area selected to develop based on this?
No.
It was just happenstance?
It was high and dry, so it made sense to site it that way. I mean, I'll put our engineer.
Typically cited to be, first use the floodplain, that's regulated, you have to start the condition is getting out of that, staying above that. But then beyond that, you always go to the highest point. So there's no coincidence that the area we selected, this just shows you illustratively that the area we selected is a high point. That's what you want to do. Where, it's good drainage, keep things dry, and stormwater management, but it actually treat it from water and discharge.
Now, one of the things we don't have on this map, because we weren't comfortable doing it, and in fact, when we reached out to the state about it, they told us that FEMA doesn't do it because the data is just not of a nature they're comfortable with. We actually talked to, we spoke to David Warga at DENREC. He's the state flood plan manager. And we asked about, storm surges and things of that nature. They're not comfortable. You can't get there on this map estimating those things. However, if you know a storm's coming, you leave, right? So if you live in the city, you're going to leave if there's a storm coming. So this does not cover a storm event. And I think, from what we've learned, that gets quite a bit speculative. And I think AECOM was careful of that too, because when you look at their map, and Chris was kind enough to send me the whole map today, so thank you. We did take a quick look at it. When you look at the AECom map and you read the notes, it does say this map was prepared for the city of Newcastle for planning purposes only. The information contained hereon is not based on engineering analysis or modeling, and is subject to change or modification at any time. Use of this information by others is at their own risk, and the city of Newcastle or its contractor in no way guarantees the accuracy of the information. So we were going to piggyback those maps a little bit, but we decided to stick, because of that disclaimer, with what we could get from the state of Delaware on their site. And anybody can actually go online and click the different buttons and see how it affects various properties in the area.
How about evacuation routes?
Great question. Next slide. Great, that's a great question. So I, of course, go ahead.
Before you, because it was about the sea level rise, evacuation routes. Planning purposes, I understand the limitations of the bathtub model and the school here, but did you assign those that additional elevation to your topo on your site, and you're still out of that future floodplain? Because
Yeah, just say purely on the elevation, the sea level rise elevation, just adding that to the, we can basically add that to the mean high tide and high water, and you add those up to the elevation, you're still below.
And we got a slide coming that's going to give you that a little more
Purely
detail.
on just the sea level rise, elevation go up.
This also, and again, it's another slide, but I'll just say, it also assumes no net fill in the floodplain. It does assume some fill on the site to get to 12, elevation 12. And I'll show you that on a more linear slide that's coming up in a moment. So we internally, and we heard this certainly from different members of the Planning Commission, what about how do you get out? What would it look like in the same sea level rise event? And again, this is not in a storm scenario. We would assume naturally that if there's a storm coming, a hurricane coming, people will leave. And that's the same, that we would expect for folks who live in downtown. But you can see here both the route out to Cherry Lane does not get flooded in this scenario, and there is the ability to get out of some barricades were put into a mode where they could be opened by the city or others with keys. There could be an alternative emergency access way out in this purple line roadway out. It takes you up to 9 as well. And we've talked about, there is the gate on Buttonwood that is locked. We certainly are happy to talk to the city about modernizing that and making that remotely controlled and dedicating that to the city so that it would be easier, so that the city wouldn't have to come out with a lock on the key and unlock that in an emergency situation. It can be done by fire safety, the police, et cetera. If there was an emergency, hurricane coming, where that could be opened up. But the good news is the main route out is not in danger based on this modeling with the 2,100-year 5-foot raise in sea level based on the website modeling. And there is an emergency route that could be created, and we're committed to working with the city to come up with a mechanism for folks to get out in an emergency situation, whatever that emergency may be. Okay, here's a slide I was mentioning earlier that we asked Mr. Diaz-Stanis to put together. So it's a slope coming off the Delaware River up to the site. It's been simplified, obviously, for demonstration purposes. But we show at 2050, which assumes a worst case scenario, 1.9 foot rise. We actually just showed 2 feet. That gets us to here, the slope. Here's 2,100 at 5 feet of sea level rise. Graphic depiction of proposed fill that would be on the site, not in the floodplain necessarily, but on site that would be added to get to a level, what's called a level 12. And then you would see here that every residential dwelling, and we would agree to this as a condition of any approval, certainly, would meet the 12-foot finished first floor elevation. The code right now requires 18. We bring it up to 20 and higher than the code. So it's code plus. And in addition, we avoid the 2 foot and the 5 foot sea level rise elevation.
Yes, so the finished floor 12 just represents your FEMA floodplain, the regulated floodplain is elevation 9. The code requires 18 inches to 10 and a half. We're just taking it, we're doubling that basically, but the commit to a 12-foot finished floor.
So that previous map that you had is not floodplain, that's mean high water.
That is right off the state's website and how they measure the 5 feet.
Yeah, so what we, so
Go
the,
to the previous.
Yep.
one, please. I'm sorry.
that's a good,
Right there. So that's not a comparable map to the maps that I was showing. That,
no.
No, it's not. We're not relying on your maps.
no, but that brown is not the floodplain with the
No.
2 and 5 years.
No, because you can't accurately model, we can't accurately model that. So this is, this is purely showing elevation, not storm surge mapping, because that's not available. This is elevations of what the sea level at, 5 foot sea level rise condition would look like in a static event, not in a storm surge.
Yeah.
That's not even enough.
And I thought I made that clear. This is not a storm event. And again, we reached out to DENREC specifically, our team did, and asked if FEMA had modeling for that. And again, I'll put it on the record, and I encourage anybody who wants to call him, please call him, David Warga, State Floodplain Manager, 739-9921. FEMA won't model that. And so we're not comfortable modeling that.
And just for clarification, so you're planning to fill to 12 feet?
They established a finished floor at 12 feet, which would be 18 inches above the minimum requirement. Minimum requirement is 18 inches above the floor plan elevation. We go an additional and double that.
And that's out of the floodplain. In the
I
floodplain, okay, just want to make sure, because we don't want to have any net fill in the
Yeah,
floodplain,
our
obviously.
goal is still currently to have it in the floodplain. And we have the stormwater basins in the areas where the floodplain is, which would create excavation, which will balance out any select bills. There'll be some select bills, very minimal, but it will be a net cut, basically, net 0 or less. So no net fill in the floodplain. When you add it all together, all the.
Now, one of the concepts, I don't think that we've heard anything about tonight so far, but I want to introduce it. And it's actually referenced in your comp plan. And I want to, you've got all the sources that we looked at in researching this, but it is a different way of looking at zoning. And I'm going to read right from your comp plan because it describes it well. This is from chapter 4 on page 37. Newcastle's land use is shaped by historic patterns of development and planned efforts starting with its first comprehensive plan in 1964. Often these two forces are at odds, whereas historically land development with mixed types of land use within neighborhoods and even buildings. The trend since the Second World War has been to devote whole areas to a single use. Hence, newer neighborhoods such as Van Dyke Village and Washington Park are solely residential. The office and the industrial parks are solely places of work. And most properties along the Great Cutoff may only be used for commercial purposes. While the original intent of this type of land use zoning was to separate incompatible uses, such as heavy industry and residential, its effects have been to isolate uses at such a distance that many simple trips must be done by car. This is right out of your comp plan. Yes, there's other literature that reinforces what's in your comp plan, but this I'm reading right from your comp plan. As a result, traffic has increased. Commercial architecture has changed to facilitate and attract automobile drivers. And former neighborhood stores die off without parking in presence of a major road. Lately, planners have looked critically at this practice, and the idea of mixing uses has come back into fashion. Further, throughout your comp plan, and I'll make some references at page 39, 47, and 49, you see these strategies and policies, and there's many of them. You saw some of them earlier, but there's also ones that are specific to mixed use. In fact, on page 47, you see a policy or strategy of continue to encourage mixed residential, retail, and office uses, incentivize private investment in Newcastle's remaining undeveloped parcels, brownfields, and redevelopment areas harmoniously with nearby land uses. Idea may include tax abatement. Certainly, we are harmonious to the school next door, but we're also harmonious to people that work in that park. There are lots of office space in that park. People come into that park, they either brown bag it, have lunch, or they leave and eat someplace unless there's a cafeteria. But they're driving in and out of that park every day. We would be a logical place to stop, to have a restaurant, retail, do some light shopping. There would be, the club is proposed in the rear. And if you work in that park and you want an affordable place to live near that park, this would be ideal. So is putting in another big box warehouse better in this park that's built and established than a mixed use? And I would respectfully say not. I think there's actually advantages to a mixed use in an established park like this for people that want to work and live in the same place, that want to eat close to where they work. This presents that opportunity. That's why your comp plan talks about mixed use and the opportunities it presents. Additionally, as recommended in the land use component of this plan, rezone for neighborhood retail or mixed use areas within or adjoining the neighborhood suitable for local commercial activity. Again, directly out of your comp plan. Former industrial sites and other brownfields represent an important redevelopment opportunity and should be brought back into productive reuse. Such sites may be opportunities to provide new neighborhood retail and mixed developments. So the one example I think Ms. Bailey mentioned, which was a good question. Well, if you support this, could somebody else come in and use this for precedent? I would agree with Mr. Rogers that not one zoning approval sets precedent for the rest, but in the future, keep in mind the park is developed out, so we have warehousing and office there now, but in the future, as some of those uses age, more mixed use may not be a very bad idea for that area, given the number of people that work there today and folks that are leaving and coming back at lunch every day. Now they have a place to stop. So I would respectfully submit 10, 20 years in the future, maybe 30, if one of those other parcels decided to redevelop, mixed use should be an opportunity. And mixed use didn't just come about because of the DG. The mixed use is a permitted exception in your existing zoning for general commercial. The GC, it does require Board of Adjustment approval. But the Gateway District isn't the first time that mixed use was permitted in the town. It's been permitted as a special exception for some time. So you see different ways that authors describe this. And I've just given some sound bites here, if you will, and I've included in the material the resources. And every situation is a little bit different, but you see different phrases: isolated, single use, outdated centric planning model. That may be something that we got online. There was one in particular that I thought really summed it up well. I think it's actually number 10. I think it's the best, just to not walk you through each one. Mix of uses establishes an ecosystem oriented around people and workers who need goods, education, and a place to live, hankering back to the factory town of the past. It is a modern incarnation of an old idea where you can walk to work. It's going back to that model from a planning perspective for some planners, for some folks, and there's a lot of literature on it. This would be consistent with that, and I find it very persuasive that this concept is embedded in your current comp plan 2020 that carries the force of law. Here's a real world example of it. This is Atwater, Pennsylvania, from 2011. And this is a site that has been partially redeveloped. Here's an office park. Here's light industry. Here's heavy industrial. And this at the time, this area in red was zoned office industrial. Sound a little familiar? Now today, the site in red has been redeveloped into apartments, townhomes, twins, and single family. Around heavy industrial, around industrial. It's this planning approach that we've been reading about, and it's also incorporated into your comp plan. This works. It's proven to work. It is an option for every city and every county to go back in this direction, particularly where it might make sense in a specific case. This is a real world example of that planning process, for that theory.
Could you go back to that, Mr. Thurber? What's the nature of that access? What roadway is that that's going through those various communities with different uses?
Seth, can you speak on that?
Sure, that's Route 29. This is actually in East Wetland Township, Pennsylvania. That's Route 29. And part of the impetus was that there was access to new access that was actually provided to the to 76 Pennsylvania Turnpike. And I was this is actually my design, and I was part of this. And the impetus of this was the township realized that their growth projections were not good. And that the reason that they weren't good is because they had no places zoned for extra additional residential. And in fact, that was starting to cause the office parks to fail. People were sick of the commute, sick of driving places. And so they agreed to this, and this came online starting in 2015 and was sold out by 2017, 2018.
And very interestingly, my firm is the municipality's traffic engineer in East Whiteland. So we were on the other side of the table, reviewing this as the traffic engineer on behalf of the municipality. And it ticked all the boxes, that Seth mentioned.
Is there connectivity from where people are living to other communities or commercial? Or,
Not enough. In my
I mean, they
opinion.
have to get in their car.
I'm all about connectivity. There's pedestrian connectivity to the office park next door. But it's always a struggle people still think about this orthodoxy of separating uses and wanting to be separated. And that's how we got into this conundrum, this traffic conundrum that we live in today.
I would submit there's certainly no perfect solution, but there are some very good solutions.
I will also tell you that along the 29 frontage street, there's some retail. And one of the things that we were adamant about is that the central spine of this new community had to have sidewalks on both sides and sidewalks separated from the street to have really great pedestrian connectivity, even though the retail uses along 29 were very automobile oriented. I think there's a Wawa there, which at least we got them to do a two-sided Wawa for their exit entrance facing the community. But that's, it's process of getting people to think, again, as Sean said, is the way we used to do things.
I have a further question, if you don't mind, since you were specifically involved in it. One of the attractive things about this is a bigger tax base. And if the town you were looking at here was starting to feel that they were on a decline, was the revenue from the taxes an aspect of their consideration, and did it materialize and bring value like they expected?
So as part of the planning process, a full fiscal analysis was done for this. In East Whiteland Township, the issue they were having was they had all these ratables, but people were starting to leave those ratables. So they took the risk of providing something that generally isn't as fiscally positive, which is for sale residential. Because this produces lots of school kids. Not like what we're doing. This produced a lot of school kids. So I have to see how fiscally positive this actually turned out to be. The fact that it rejuvenated those office parks, that a lot of the people who live there work in those office parks and their leases were able to be signed again, I think is what caused it to be more fiscally positive. But it took a little bit of a leap of faith.
That babies are expensive.
Babies are expensive and kids are expensive. It's a thing, but that's it's a little bit different. That in this community, we're talking about mostly a rental product that is attractive to people without children. but it'd be interesting to know because it's almost, it's hard to be determinative what caused the office parks to turn around. And in fact, some of them haven't turned around, right? There's always been, but they have gotten better since this time. And was it the fact that we were able to provide a workforce? It's impossible to know.
Thank you.
Ms. Bailey, since you did bring up fiscal, there's something I'd like to clean up for the record. I think I mentioned at an earlier meeting, we were anticipating tax benefits of $900 to $1 million annually. And I put on the record that we wanted to double check those numbers and circle back with you. And since you brought it up, I think it's probably just a perfect segue just to bring it up. I had a gentleman, his real name is Jim Smith. He works in my office. He used to be one of the managers in the assessment department in Newcastle County. I had him and one of our folks who has an accounting background take a look at some comparables and just crunch the initial numbers that we saw. And again, these are not appraisers, but I wanted to give you a better forecast as we had some time to look. And so our current breakout in that regard, and again, this is rough math, but the Colonial School District appears to make out the best in this scenario. The Colonial School District would get approximately $478,000 in annual taxes based on our updated analysis. The Newcastle County Vocational School would get approximately $38,000. Crossing guards would get about $3,500. The Newcastle County would get about $73,000 because of how the tax ratios work. And the city annually would get approximately $265,000. It does appear, and the school assessments and impact fees can vary, but some of the more recent ones we've seen, and this was over at the Cavaliers project by the mall, was a $6,000 a unit impact fee per school. And that can range, I've seen it from 4 to 6. Sometimes the school districts will confirm there is capacity, but you have to submit a plan that's in the process to get an official determination. But if you assume a $4,000 or $5,000 impact fee per unit, you're over $2 million. And that's a one-time impact fee. That's not an annual repeating thing. The impact fees are a relative, well, they started in 1997-ish. So total, again, recurring for the city of Newcastle, we're estimating around 265, 260 in that range. So when you add that up, and I'm not going to include the impact fees because we just don't know until for sure, until we officially apply, but I think a rough range in total tax benefit to the area, not just the city, is about $858,000, give or take. Again, rough math, but I promised you an update on that after we had some time to chew on it. And I'm confident we've had people look at it that have experience, at least in assessment and double checking the math, and that's what we're doing.
Thank you. Are you guys going to be seeking an abatement? for
No.
this building? Okay.
So just to sum up, the big box logistic versus the mixed use development scenario that I proposed this evening. Contiguous to the charter school has obviously been one of our big points tonight.
I had a question about the charter school itself.
Sure.
When you met with them, did you discuss with them the impact that families would have, like, as far as like their enrollment and like their anticipation of additional enrollments or being able the capacity in order to maybe house some of these students within the school itself?
We did not. I think we spent probably, I would say, a good half an hour with them on the phone, and then they had an internal meeting and voted. The board, the internal board. I don't think they got into that issue. They were interested in trip generation. They were interested certainly in possible new students that would flow to them from this site. But I don't think they got into that issue with us or asked us any questions about that. Number of units. Yeah, we shared our concept plan. So they were fully aware of the trip generation. They did not want, what was clear to us, they did not want another 100 trucks back there, whether it's ADT or peak hour, they were far more interested in cars versus trucks, and they were certainly interested in a potential synergy between a mixed-use community with families with children and the school and what they offer. And, you know, we're not just contiguous to charter school use, we're also if you really think about it, an underutilized parcel today that's there vacant, that is in an area that is earmarked at level 1, level 2. We're introducing new housing and housing types, so we have, you know, the twins, the singles, the towns. So there's different housing types so they can appeal to a broad range of folks and incomes. It's new housing, as I mentioned, building codes are updated, they're more green as they get updated. So this would be new housing stock in the area, and you'd be hard pressed to find a lot of that in this immediate area. It's very appealing to people and also helps on cost and, you know, environmental emissions, you know, from electricity usage being reduced, water being reduced, with more efficient faucets and shower heads. Those are all things introduced into the new codes that aren't in the old codes in many instances. And in terms of the housing, yes, some will be sold, some will be rented. Those ratios have not been finalized yet. That's a little bit market driven, but there'll be both. So when the comp plan talks about new housing, quality new housing, that is certainly one thing that we can provide. Again, there will be some rental component, but we have to see sort of how the market shakes out on that. It is changing a little bit right now. There will certainly be both fee simple and rental to appeal to both markets. New retail and commercial options in the park to provide opportunities for folks who work there. For the by right plan, the one permitted under the existing zoning, we don't believe any traffic study would be required for that. For the logistic use, we are volunteering to do a study. And certainly, I think you have some some broad ability to require some analysis as well. And Mr. Rogers covered that earlier. But we volunteered, as you may recall, at our first or second meeting to do that based on BelDOT standards with Nicole's help working with the town. That's important because it will identify areas along the road and out into Route 9 that may need some improvement. Logistics center, again, would not be required by right use. So this plan, this option comes with some additional things that if I was a neighbor, I would want to know are happening, like the traffic study. Beautiful river views made public. We would let the public certainly onto the site to enjoy these views, not just folks who rent there. You saw the design in earlier meetings, highly walkable, lots of sidewalks. We want to provide opportunities for interconnection. You'll see to the far right, the picture, and this is going to take some work, but you got to start someplace. But one of the options would be to consider, and it would be costly, but connecting. It would really be the last opportunity for the school, I think, with now not just them, but us, reaching out to you and perhaps the state about doing some connection. It's 1.5 miles to Delaware Avenue. Sorry, Bella Street, right? Bella Street. To the school and our parcel right there on the edge. That's 1.5 miles, give or take. There would be an opportunity there. Again, it would take resources and people coming together, but we know how to do that in Delaware. But there really could be an opportunity here, and this would be a spark, an additional spark to generate that opportunity to do that connection. And it was brought to my attention by one of the folks who lives here in town currently, that there was a recent article in the News Journal about Delaware, and I was aware of this, having the highest residential rent increase in the country of 12% between 2019 and 2021. So this is one small step in helping to address that issue as well. But Delaware is leading the charge on that. I was really surprised by that, but that is a News Journal article available online. We were asked about waste pickup. We'll keep that private. We won't ask the city to take that on. As I understand it, residential, city typically takes that on, non-residential you don't. We would keep that private to help minimize impact on the city's tax base. And We did check with MSC. Somebody asked about whether they thought the rates might go up if this was approved. We did confirm with MSC that there was no reason to believe that would happen. A project like this was approved. We talked to one of the managers there. And I've got his name here, just for the record. I'll share it with you and put it on the record. Scott Bloomquist, who's the general manager at MSC, is who we spoke with. And those were the key points. Went back and looked through the questions. So the theme of this last slide is simple. Don't let perfect be the enemy of good. Perfection is easier, certainly when you're starting with a brand new town and you have a blank slate. That is not the situation. We have an infill piece. I think we have an amazing plan architecturally. The views are undeniable. It's a rare opportunity to do something different here that offers a lot of benefit, we believe. And we know we're at an early stage. This is just the comp plan amendment stage. We have a lot further to go through with rezoning and then the site plan specifically. But we think we're offering town a lot here. We think certainly even looking at it in the most critical way, this project would be just as good, if not better, than two big boxes in a logistics parks with trucks running in and out. Why would that be better than this? I would say there's no reason to conclude that. This would be better, we think. And we think we've made a good argument for that. And we appreciate your consideration of our arguments. And we're happy to answer any questions you have tonight. And that's why one of the reasons I have the team here to make sure we can be as thorough as possible.
I have a question. I'm sure this was designed to maximize the return for the owners, as far as the amount of apartment buildings and the number of houses and things like that. Have you guys also looked at maybe like a reduction of the number of like apartment buildings and things like that to determine if it's still feasible and profitable for you? The only reason I ask is because a lot of the language that I've seen in the comp plan in reference to housing references specific actual like housing and not multifamily development, buildings. So if you were to change some of the layouts to include more housing, maybe less apartments, things like that, is it still going to be profitable enough that it's something you would consider?
I can't say that we've done the economics on it. Well, I'm getting a point to Seth. Seth, has there
Well,
been
I'm
an
going to tell
economic
you that it's
analysis?
not remotely maximized in terms of density. It would be actually quite feasible to do more on a site like this. We actually kept it to, I think, a scale that we were comfortable that would work in the marketplace. And as for the the differences between whether it's for sale or rental, I mean, I think one of the unique things about this plan is that, and something I would challenge any of you to find me, is that it actually has 5 housing types in a single plan. Very rare. Which is that it has stacked flats that are served by elevators, stacked flats that are walk-up apartments, twins, townhomes, and singles. And whether it's for rent or for sale, I don't know how actually relevant that is. But it's providing housing for many different housing types.
Trying to look at it as like, if we're trying to meet goals within the existing comp plan, if something like this were to say benefit the city and meet some of those goals, that's what I'm trying to figure out. So some of the goals mentioned, converting multifamily dwellings to single family, things like that. So that's the only reason I brought up that question.
I think it's a fair question. And I think, certainly in the site plan review with you and the rest of the board, we could tinker with the densities. I'd be surprised if this density is higher than your average density in the heart of the city. I think we're probably below that. But we're certainly willing to look at that. First time that's come up, it's certainly a fair question about density. So I'll make a commitment that we'll work with you on the site plan and considering the density and looking at the numbers.
100% agree with what Sean just said. I just want to add, one of the reasons why you're seeing apartments, and we have another project we're looking at apartments on, it's in the county, is because one of the things we've heard over and over again is the need for multifamily housing in this region. Like, there's a significant, there's not enough of them in this region. I mean, it's something we hear time and time and time and time again. We've decided we want to be one of those folks to address that.
Can I make a comment to you about this, really to the whole planning commission? I think there's a lot more we could do in terms of understanding what's going on with this problem of we want people to move in, we want them to buy a house, we want them to upgrade their house and make it nice and invest in it and all that kind of stuff. If you look at the development that's going on presently in the historic district, that's not really what's happening. It's turning into all rentals and multifamily. So that's just a fact, except that we don't have any data on it. And I think it's probably our role to look at that more closely and to make more specific recommendations. So I think your question is right, but I think we also own some responsibility to do some of that work and bring some of that forward. Because some of the trends that I see, it disturb me, and I don't think that they're in line with the objectives of the plan either. So maybe that's something we could look at doing as a project ourselves as well.
Question about other services, police services, that would be city, correct?
Police would be city, I believe. I think fire, we figured out would be Goodwill in terms of jurisdiction. We've not met with them yet. We certainly would as part of the site plan review. I think that's pretty standard to make sure we're on the same page. And in Newcastle County, there's actually impact fees for fire, ambulance, and police. Unfortunately, we don't have them here in the city. Maybe that's fortunate for my client, but we certainly will sit down with the chief and talk about those things.
Because there would be a cost involved in
There may be, but
leasing that many residents
well, it's
somewhat remote to the city center.
yeah. If you think of the height, it's the 3 stories is pretty well, 3-4 stories, pretty limited. But we would sit down. Certainly, they would have jurisdiction. And again, this is sort of the 50,000 foot view. There's the rezoning and conditions that we would proffer on the rezoning after we talk to folks like the chief. And then, of course, the site plan approval. So, great question, fair question. How are you going to get services? What's your infrastructure? So we know who, but we would take the next step, certainly, before rezoning approval and have those more detailed conversations.
Planning commission members, city planner, other questions at this time for the team? All right, well, thank you very much.
You didn't give me enough time, I'm sorry.
Oh,
I glanced through this document and it makes a lot of statements, some of which honestly I don't understand, to be quite honest with you, but it appears that many of the questions have been resolved. If we wanted more information about how they were resolved or what was behind some of them, could we know that?
Absolutely. We'll keep you copied on all of our written communications and with Plus and the different agencies. The most recent has been with DART. DART has spent they have a very significant interest in this property and two bus shelters. In fact, they contacted us, I think, within days after the Plus hearing. As you know, there's already a bus route through here, and they want to expand upon that a bit and use my client's property to help them do that, which we're happy to talk to them about and try to work with them. It depends on what it is. For example, one of the things they're putting at is, would we allow the bus to stop internally? So we're looking at that. We also want to talk to the city about that, because you may not like that, or you may like that. So we're holding them at bay a little bit. We're at the very apron of the really are at the beginning of the land use process, the way we've done this, the way we've slowed the process down voluntarily. So we'll keep you all up to date on all of our dealings with the state agencies for certain. You're welcome.
anything else from the planning commission? All right, public comment. Let me read the one public comment that received the email. I keep feel very strongly that since the 2020 comprehensive plan was completed so recently and such a substantial project was not recommended to be included in the plan, the planning commission, council, and board of adjustment should not support such a change for the projects being considered. Council should vote no to amending the comprehensive plan to accommodate special interest developers. And that's signed by Karen Wrightson, Newcastle resident. And Kathy, I can get you a, oh, you have a copy. Okay. So I will open it up for public comment. Comments are to be directed to the whole commission, not to any one individual. And I do have a timer, so we'll limit the public comments to 2 minutes. State your name.
So my name is James Wilson. I've lived in Newcastle for 17 years. My 18-year-old son is here. That's sort of the reason why I'm here. So he's grown up in Newcastle his whole life. He likes Newcastle. He actually would like to be able to, live in Newcastle on his own. So I think there are a few things about this project that I like. But the thing that I like the most about this project is the multifamily apartments, because people, so is there any other Gen Z here today? I mean, I don't, one more Gen Z. So I mean, that's a generation
Way to
that
rub it in.
don't usually come out to these types of meetings, don't, their voices are not heard quite as much as say like the baby boomers. But, this kind of housing we don't have very much of, and what we do have is too expensive, far too expensive. As was mentioned, Delaware had the highest increase in median rents of any state in the country between 2019 and 2021. That is, it should be on the top of the minds of every government official here in Newcastle and everywhere. Like, we need more new housing so that housing can be affordable. That was one of the key goals of the concept plan, affordable housing. How do you get affordable housing? You build more housing so that you have a greater supply. And those multifamily units are again, the thing that I think we need more of. And I just want to come here and ask you to use your discretion that you have by law under the comp plan and under the law to permit this to go forward. Again, this is far more valuable to the city of Newcastle than another factory. And I think it's an exciting chance. I mean, in the comp plan, that thing, remember the population numbers for 2050 for Newcastle? What the projected increase in population for our city over the next 30 years? 300 people? In 30 years? I mean, are we going to stop having children? I think we should continue to have children and let them live in the city that they love.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Yes, Phil Gross, 1301 13th Street. I guess you heard Mr. Tucker say that there's housing communities connected to it, surrounding it. It doesn't necessarily mean that that's what that space should be done, should be used for. If it was so beneficial, they would have done it before. The quick way out is doing industrial. It's not like building a factory in the city. It's out of the city. Growth chart, I find it impossible to believe that it only showed a growth of 300 people. Even if you built nothing else, just rehab, as one of the commissioners said, that's what the comp plan had in mind. Use what you got, the inventory that you got, upgrade it, make it usable. I find it hard to believe that there will not be a major problem at the intersection of Cherry Lane and Lucan's Drive. I parked in the LabCorp parking lot. It can't handle what it's got, and you want to increase the traffic. in the traffic study, it conveniently said, well, we're only gonna take these hours. You can't cherry pick the volume of traffic. You can't do it. Plus report, is there a way of getting a copy of that?
Certainly, it's public.
Okay, that, do you have a sales or rental agency that's gonna be spearheading the project?
Mario, do we have that yet?
Affordable housing, or the commission's going by that cute statement of affordable housing. Once you sign control over to the developer, just like in Delaware City, 6 sinkholes popped up. Properties that the management company didn't want to expose that those things were happening. And they can't do anything about that or DuPont project or Grassdale. Once the city signed over rights to let the developer do what he told them they were going to do, residents couldn't do anything. City solicitor knew what they were going to do. He couldn't stop them. So I don't think it should be like a blank check that this commission should do until, like Commissioner Batty said, get all the facts, get all the information. Don't go by what's said, get it in writing. So you have recourse and you don't look like Planning Commission recommended this. Look what we got now. Thank you.
Thank you, Phil. And anyone else? No, I think everyone else from the team. All right, well, thank you all very much. Oh,
I'd like to add on a personal comment.
all right.
Um,
Would you state your name?
I'm Zeb Wilson. I live on 4th Street for basically my whole life. And I kind of like to still live in Newcastle. But the current rent prices that you can find on various websites, like 1/3 of the median income is kind of insane. I think that would kind of kick me out, price me out. So a project like this, where I could maybe bike to see my parents while still living in the same city, would be very nice.
Thank you. Anyone else? All right. Thanks, everyone, for all the information. It was a lot, and for all the comments tonight. Planning Commission, we do have a meeting next Monday. It should not be this lengthy. It's a regular commission meeting where we will have the regular agenda items. And we can talk in more depth about next steps. By code, we do have to have a public meeting on the rezoning. And we have to send out first class letters 15 days in advance of the meeting. So we need to do some discussion about timing of that meeting and any other information that we would like.
Because I have no idea what that means. But it looks like how comment works. Are we going to discuss anything there? Do we make a recommendation there? So it's like, oh, maybe you all know.
Right. Very good. Is
I'm sorry, I just wanted for clarification, would the vote be on the comp? I was under the impression, and we're open to whatever the chairperson of the commission wants. My impression was that you were going to vote first on the amendment to the comp plan before voting on the rezoning, but maybe I misunderstood.
do you want, what is the recommendation? I mean, I know that that this public meeting is a requirement on the zoning and or public hearing. I'm sorry. And as far as the order of what will happen, we could make a recommendation at that meeting. We could just get public input. and take some time to digest it and,
So, what, you know, you have to have a public hearing. And what we're suggesting is that the decision-making process be bifurcated. And if the planning commission, the process,
Yes.
the thing, if the planning commission doesn't feel that it has merit, then they would take action to recommend disapproval.
Yes, let me just clarify. I think, and it may have just been a misunderstanding. I think what the chairperson said was vote on the rezoning. And the way I was, and we're fine with that, by the way, but I thought in your slideshow, and I thought what you had wanted, and of course it's the commission's decision what you want, but I thought the idea was there'd be a vote first on the merits of amending the comp plan. And that would either be voted up or down in terms of a recommendation, and then only if that was supported, would we then move to the next phase to vote on the zoning or rezoning of the property. Maybe I misunderstood. I'm just seeking some clarification on it so I understand.
It would be my recommendation that if the comprehensive plan amendment in the positive not proceed without the rezoning and site plan.
Okay.
So, but I don't envision at this point a vote and or a separate vote on a comprehensive plan amendment to the city council and have them take separate action on amending the comp plan unless, you know, it's attached to the rezoning and the site plan.
Can I restate that in English for my fellow commissioners? My understanding is because of the way that this was presented to city council, we can't separate them and vote them separately. So my understanding of what you said is that we have to conceptually agree that we would amend the comp plan before we would then go on to consider everything else. But merely us agreeing that we say we decided that we would amend it isn't something we can recommend uniquely to the city council because we have to consider the thing holistically. Would that be a correct restatement?
Yes, and I have other practical reasons that we can discuss at the next meeting.
But I think it's important that we recognize that we can't tease this thing apart and vote it separately. We just have to take step decisions to decide how much more deeply we want to get into it. And if we decide that we want to get more into it, we got a whole lot more work to do. That's my read. I hope that helps you guys because it took me a long time to understand this.
So isn't that the way he stated it inside the presentation?
Sort of, but if there's a vote on the change in the comprehensive plan, it still doesn't actually amount to a recommendation. It's just us in our little universe.
In summary, at our next meeting on Monday, we can get into the specifics of the next steps and the timing of those next steps. So, if there is no other discussion, motion to adjourn, all motion.
I'll second.
I
Thank you.
think we're all in favor. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Get on the road.
It's not good.
I'm starving.